Which again, credit to George, because nobody else believed in this. Yeah. Nobody thought that computers would have any home in Hollywood, but George knew. George saw it. He found the way to digitize editing, digitize effects, digitize sound. I mean, he knew what the future needed to be. So if you want to talk about the origins of sort of these modern animated projects, you really have to take it all the way back to the early 1970s when a guy named Ed Catmull at the University of Utah, he was really interested in computer science, and I think he saw computer science in a way that other people didn't really.
In graduate school, the very first class I took was one in computer graphics. It was like, gong, holy cow, you can make pictures here. We could do animation.
I think he immediately saw the future potential of being able to create and subsequently move something in a computer. So what he did was, he helped develop the technology and was the first person to map his own hand into a series of polygons that could be translated into the computer, and then subsequently figure out how to take that structure and move it. And so right there in the early 1970s, that was the first sort of in-computer built piece of 3D animation. And that recognition for what he had achieved would later set him up to be hired by George Lucas.
George Lucas graduated from the University of Southern California in 1967 with a bachelor's degree in film. His first major success was American Graffiti, a film that defined the nostalgic cruise culture of the 1950s. This success gave 20th Century Fox the confidence to greenlight his much more obscure project, Star Wars. However, many of the shots in the film presented challenges that required the invention of new technologies. So in 1975, George founded Industrial Light and Magic, a production company focused on creating groundbreaking visual effects capable of bringing George's vision to life.
I want to be able to go from top to bottom all digital. See if you can find somebody to head up the computer division.
So he imagined a world in which you could edit something digitally and non-linearly in a computer. So he set out to find the smartest people in computer science who could develop this technology and make it happen. So he started this whole new division of the company called the Graphics Group, right? And the Lucasfilm Graphics Group was a computer science group that not only developed something called EditDroid, which is the predecessor to every digital editing platform that there is, they also developed more and more of these ways to animate effects into a computer. But while this graphics group was being formed, they also hired a very young Disney animator named John Lasseter. And so John Lasseter comes over to this Lucasfilm Graphics Group, and he and Ed Catmull head this thing up, and it is really interesting, with a lot of really interesting implications. Now, let me take you back to the other part of the animation universe, what's happening at Disney. So during the 80s, it had been kind of a drag since Walt Disney had passed away in 1966.
After Walt's passing, Disney entered a period of creative and financial drought with multiple changes in CEOs. Michael Eisner was president of rival film studio Paramount Pictures from 1976 to 1984, during which he had overseen massive successes in film and television, including Saturday Night Fever, Grease, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Happy Days, and Cheers. Roy E. Disney, Walt Disney's nephew and a shareholder of the company, brought over Eisner in hopes that his direction as CEO would turn the company around. Michael then oversaw smash hits such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Good Morning Vietnam, and released Disney classics on VHS that had previously been reserved for theatrical releases. He also revitalized their theme parks with new rides based on popular films such as Star Tours and Splash Mountain. Michael led the era known as the Disney Renaissance, and during his 21-year reign as CEO, he would 13x Disney's market value.
He finds this guy, Michael Eisner. He had overseen a ton of successes, including Raiders of the Lost Ark from Lucasfilm. So he and George already had a working relationship, right? Which, of course, would be valuable down the line. So Michael Eisner comes over from Paramount to run Disney. And when he does, he brings someone else from Paramount with him. He brings Jeffrey Katzenberg, right? So now, Michael Eisner is in charge of Disney as a whole. And Jeffrey Katzenberg specifically is in charge of the animation studio, which again had really been struggling. So part of what they wanted to develop was that they knew that there were still so many great stories to be told, but animation was costly. And the returns up to that point had not been great for them over the last couple of decades. So they were looking for a way to make animation a little faster and less expensive. The drawings are hand-drawn on paper, and then they're transferred to celluloid where they're inked and then painted over with physical paint. Well, Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner went to ILM, George's company, and this is when the computer graphics group was still part of ILM. They went to them and they said, hey, do you guys have any ideas? I mean, you guys understand animation. You understand what we're dealing with here. Do you have any idea how we could potentially do the inking and painting in a computer? Now, this was a totally revolutionary idea and was breaking like 70 years of tradition at this point. But the computer graphics group at ILM developed, Ed Catmull, all those guys, developed a way for Disney to still hand draw the animation, but then to scan it into the computer and use a digital inking and painting program to color it digitally, which did a ton to reduce the amount of time that it takes to animate something like that. And so when you think about the Disney Renaissance, what we would call the Disney Renaissance, which starts with The Little Mermaid in 1989 and continues really through The Lion King in 1994. The Little Mermaid is hand-drawn and hand-painted, but every film from 1990 on is digitally colored and digitally inked, and they look gorgeous. Now, I'll always prefer the look of real hand-mixed colors, but those computer colors are gorgeous, and they do allow you to do a lot of things that you otherwise would not be able to do. So that is sort of the starting of the relationship between Michael Eisner, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and ILM. But George decides that he doesn't want to be somebody who partly runs a software company. So he starts looking for a buyer for this technology, right? The way he packages it is, hey, I'm selling the complete computer graphics division of Lucasfilm, that we have created this super powerful graphics processing computer that we call the Pixar computer. But George wanted to make sure he found the right buyer because he knew that there was so much potential in what was happening. He knows that projects need to be under the right people at the right time.
Right.
And so anyway, this computer graphics group, while John Lasseter and Ed Catmull were there and they were all part of Lucasfilm, they were developing short films. They were developing short films featuring characters, right? Not just backgrounds, not just layers, not just inanimate objects, characters. And so it became immediately evident the potential for character-driven CG animation. So in finding a buyer, George gets very, very lucky. It catches the interest of Steve Jobs, who over the next 5 or 6 years would end up putting a ton of money into Pixar. Steve Jobs has Ed Catmull and John Lasseter working on all these different things, but mostly they're producing commercial work and short little inserts for things, right? Well, it becomes evident that there is room to do a real character-driven story. And I don't mean just a short film, I mean a full-length animated picture, right? It's a very costly thing to take a risk on. So Steve Jobs wanted to find a distribution partner that would help split the cost of making the movie and had the ability and the infrastructure to properly market the movie. And they find that in Michael Eisner, because Michael Eisner is forward-thinking enough to understand that there is a future for this, okay? So in 1991, Michael Eisner makes a deal with Steve Jobs for Toy Story, a full-length animated picture that is gonna be completely done digitally in the computer, right? Now this is 1991. It would take 4 years to develop this movie and for it to eventually come out. And when it did, it changed everything.
Hello? Oh, yeah! Ah! Whoa! Hey, whoa, 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 whoa! Did I frighten you? Didn't mean to. Sorry. Howdy. My name is Woody, and this is Andy's room. That's all I wanted to say.
Because all of a sudden, looking at moving drawings is not the only game in town. All of a sudden, there's this completely different type of animation. It's not hand-drawn, it's not stop motion. I mean, it's just completely new. And it's all predicated on this computer science technology that had been developed at ILM.
Right. Now, Toy Story is the first film that is 100% digital animation. Now, I know that through ILM, they were already incorporating digital animation in films with like Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, things like that. So Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park, when did those come out?
Terminator 2 came out in '91 from James Cameron,
Okay.
and Jurassic Park came out in '93 from Steven
So
Spielberg.
these are all right around the same time. But
Oh, this is all happening. This
Yeah.
is all happening right at the same time. That's why it's so exciting, because this digital technology is new, but ILM had found a way to make it gangbusters. I mean, they had found ways to incorporate these digitally animated effects in ways that nobody ever would imagine. I mean, think about T2,
yeah,
right?
him coming through the bars.
Yeah, him coming through the bars, him melting into puddles, him having the weapon hands, I mean, all
Right.
of it. And then you think about Jurassic Park, you think about those breathtaking full shots of these dinosaurs that are intercut with these incredible animatronics, and it creates this seamless thing. And so all of a sudden, digital effects isn't just for nerds.
Right.
All of a sudden, digital effects.
Actually viable.
Yes, all of a sudden it's actually viable. All of a sudden, digital effects is the future of Hollywood, which again, credit to George, because nobody else believed in this. Nobody thought that computers would have any home in Hollywood, but George knew. George saw it. He found the way to digitize editing, digitize effects, digitize sound. I mean, he knew what the future needed to be. So let me take you back to a different part of our story. And let's get back to Jeffrey Katzenberg, okay? Jeffrey Katzenberg had been heading up Disney's animation studio. And through Katzenberg, Disney had undergone this entire renaissance. They had all these hits: Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin. They had The Lion King.
Hercules.
Well, that's a little later. Okay. And it could be argued that that's a decline in quality from the previous masterpieces.
Don't say that.
Look, I love it too. I love it too.
I love Hercules.
Yeah, but by 1994, Jeffrey Katzenberg had overseen all of these hits for Disney, okay? And so it was Jeffrey Katzenberg's opinion that he should be promoted to co-chair of the company because there was a vacancy to fill. And at one point, Michael Eisner had told Katzenberg that if that vacancy ever were open, that he would promote Katzenberg and make him co-CEO of Walt Disney Entertainment, you know? So here's the other part of the rub. Jeffrey Katzenberg also argued that because of the incredible success of the Disney Renaissance films that he had overseen, that he deserved a piece of the box office. He felt he was owed additional compensation for the massive and unprecedented success of all of these films he had developed, right? And Michael Eisner didn't feel the same. And so those two issues together led to Jeffrey Katzenberg being kind of very unceremoniously let go from Walt Disney Pictures. And that was huge because, again, this guy had become the new king, the new titan, and he had made Disney a very relevant name again. And all of a sudden, Michael Eisner doesn't see fit to reward that, for lack of a better term.
Right.
Yeah.
Instead, he absorbs that position himself and
Yes.
then also absorbs all of that additional income.
Yes, and also lets Katzenberg go. So after Katzenberg is let go, he decides that the best thing for him to do is to try to form his own studio, which is not a bad call. He's got the experience, he understands what it takes to tell a good story, he knows what it takes to make a successful movie. So he teams up with legendary Hollywood icon Steven Spielberg, right, who had had a ton of hits at that point, and a dude named David Geffen, who also was a very well-known Hollywood producer and had this massive record label. So it was a great partnership because they all three brought so much to the table. So one of the first films that they decide to produce is The Prince of Egypt, and that is a traditionally hand-drawn movie that also uses that same digital ink and paint system that had been developed at ILM, right? And here's what's so interesting is that the movie, even though it's hand-drawn but digitally inked and colored, there are some 3D modeled elements in the movie, right? Like you look at the parting of the Red Sea scene, that water is a separate layer, it's computer generated. So after the success of Toy Story, DreamWorks wants to dip their toes into the world of 3D CG modeled animation. And they develop this movie called Ants, and they subcontract to a company called Pacific Imageworks. They hire Pacific Imageworks to create the character animation for the movie Ants. Now, again, I'm using the term character animation. This is very important here because landscapes and floating graphics and pieces of food, you know, that had all been done a lot. But animating a character, that's very different. You have a muscular structure, you have expressions, you have, you know, all these different things that are very unique. So they hire Pacific Imageworks to handle the CG elements of the movie. And the movie comes out, it's definitely enough of a success that they want to do more. Well, one of the things that they had been trying to develop was a movie called Shrek. And it's based on a picture book from 1990. And Steven Spielberg had been trying to make the movie for a while as a traditionally drawn 2D animated film. But when he came into DreamWorks, they had the idea of like, oh, hey, this could be a CG animated film because Toy Story just came out, and that was freaking huge, you know? So maybe we could dip our toe into something like that. So DreamWorks in-house was trying to develop a look and a feel for this movie, Shrek. They had hired Chris Farley to come in and do all of the voiceover for it. They had done this test animation reel. And when the animators presented the reel, the test reel, to Jeffrey Katzenberg, he hated it. Absolutely hated it. Literally threw the tape that they had handed him in the trash. Jeffrey Katzenberg was a smart dude. He understood that that whole movie needed to be retooled. It needed to be something different. Also, another big part of the difference was that DreamWorks was trying to do the CG animation in-house through motion capture, and the technology to make that look good for that kind of project was just not there. And so I think when they saw that they just couldn't handle it the way it needed to be handled, they reached out again to Pacific Imageworks to do the animation for Shrek. Well, during the development of all of that, it became very clear that Pacific Imageworks was an asset that DreamWorks needed to have full-time access to. So they bought
them, yeah.
Pacific Imageworks outright. And so that's how Shrek got developed. And of course, Chris Farley had passed away during production of that movie, right? So he didn't get to complete the lines that he'd recorded. And it was at that point that they definitely decided that the whole thing just needed to be scrapped and reworked. So let me take you back over to Disney. Toy Story is a massive success. Michael Eisner is very happy with it. And of course, Steve Jobs, the guy who had bought Pixar and owned Pixar, was also very happy with it. The people who worked at Pixar, Ed Catmull and John Lasseter and all those guys, very happy with it. And everybody is so happy, in fact, that they sign a 5-picture deal with the Walt Disney Company. And so that would take them through movies like A Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles. And I mean, yeah, bangers, banger after banger. I mean, you could argue that those are Pixar's best.
Which makes 6 films in a row that were massively successful from Pixar.
Yes.
6 in a row.
Yes, 6 films in a row that were massively successful from Pixar. And after that deal was up, it was doing so well that Steve Jobs thought that Pixar deserved a bigger share of the money, because in producing these movies, the Walt Disney Company was doing none of the production. They were just paying for part of it and marketing them and distributing the movie. They didn't have any creative input. They weren't in charge of anything. And so Steve Jobs really felt like, hey, we're big enough that we need a bigger piece of the pie. So Steve Jobs sets out to try to negotiate a new deal with Michael Eisner. And now again, I want to stress that these Pixar movies had been a big success for the Walt Disney Company. In an era post Jeffrey Katzenberg, when the traditional animation studio was starting to not have hits in the same way. So this was a very important thing, and a deal could not be reached, and Michael Eisner let Steve Jobs walk away, and that terminated the partnership between Pixar and Disney. And so that whole thing was in limbo, and it wouldn't be until a year later when Bob Iger became CEO of the Walt Disney Company. See, the flub with Pixar, you have to understand, this was just another in a long list of growingly questionable decisions that Michael Eisner had been making for the direction of the company, and the board members had started to lose faith in him. And so it was at that point that they sought to convince him to retire when his contract expired in 2005.
My dad, my uncle, and those that followed have created an amazing legacy that has touched people around the world for generations. Lately, though, I've become concerned with the direction in which the Disney Company is moving. I believe it's time to take action, and we could use your help. If you're a Disney shareholder, in my view, the best way to help save Disney is to vote no on the re-election of Michael Eisner, George Mitchell.
And so they replaced him with a guy named Bob Iger, who had worked his way all the way up from, I think he was like an intern at one point and had worked his way all the way up to head of programming at ABC, which during the 90s, Disney had purchased ABC. So all these guys, are aware of each other, and the Disney shareholders saw Bob Iger as someone who could fill that role successfully. And so when Bob Iger comes in, he understands the importance of what the Pixar brand had done for Disney, and they don't want to lose access to those guys.
Especially
those guys
when
are...
you don't have Katzenberg.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Especially when the animation studio is struggling, you definitely don't want to lose access to Pixar. So Bob Iger is able to strike a new deal with Pixar, and that is a tremendous thing for them. And it's so good that Disney makes the decision that they really would just prefer to own Pixar outright so that a deal never has to be negotiated again. At that point, they took John Lasseter and Ed Catmull, and they promoted them to bigger roles within the overall Walt Disney Company. In fact, Ed Catmull went from overseeing not only Pixar to overseeing the whole of the Walt Disney Animation Studios, right? That includes the traditionally hand-drawn studio and Pixar. But when he went over to the hand-drawn studio, it was evident that there was room for them also to be doing these CG movies, right? And then they started having huge hits again through the Walt Disney Animation label, films like Wreck-It Ralph, and then later films like Frozen, which had become the highest grossing animated film of all time when it came out. So that's how everything shook out between Disney and Pixar. Let me take you back to DreamWorks for a second. So Katzenberg and Spielberg and David Geffen, they're all developing this movie, Shrek. Shrek comes out in 2001.
Hey, wait a minute, I got a great idea. I'll stick with you. You a mean green fighting machine. Together we'll scare the spit out anybody that crosses us. Ah! Oh, wow. That was really scary. And if you don't mind me saying, if that don't work, your breath certainly will get the job done, cause you definitely need some Tic Tacs or something, cause your breath stinks.
And again, kind of changes the whole landscape, because Shrek is unlike anything that Disney was doing. Shrek is irreverent. It's kind of gross. It is a lampooning of everything fairy tale, which is sort of how Disney had built a lot of their brand, You've got Disney and Pixar on one hand, and you've got DreamWorks on the other hand, and through the next decade or so, they're kind of pushing each other, because as one studio releases a new hit movie, it sort of inspires, oh, well, what else could we do with this technology? And eventually, with the success of all the Pixar movies and with the success of movies like Shrek, you get all of these other franchises from these companies. You get all of these other studios that are trying to have their own CG animated film unit. You've got Blue Sky over at Fox. They're producing things like the Ice Age franchise, and you end up with like Illumination, right, which is huge. They've made something like $5 billion on the Despicable Me franchise. There for a while, it felt like you had imitators on every block. But that's kind of the long and short of how we got from traditional hand-drawn animation in the 30s all the way to these beautifully CG animated films of the late 90s through the 2000s. And really, if you want to get down to it, it all started with George Lucas hiring Ed Catmull to just see what the technology was capable of. And that's the kind of dude George was. George always wanted to see what's the farthest we can push this technology. Again, he digitized editing, he digitized sound in movies, he digitized effects, and eventually he would digitize film itself. Attack of the Clones, 2002, that was the first movie ever shot on digital film. And now, every movie is shot on digital film. Using real film makes you a dinosaur or some sort of art house connoisseur.
Yeah, Tarantino.
A Tarantino. And I love it. It does look better, sure. But shooting on digital made all of the other components easier to do, faster, more simple. George is a genius. The guys at Pixar are geniuses. Steve Jobs, genius. Michael Eisner, a genius. Missteps do not disqualify you from being a genius. I mean, you could say the same thing about Jeffrey Katzenberg. You know, there have been missteps, sure, but there have also been huge hits like Prince of Egypt, the whole Shrek franchise, you know, the Madagascar franchise, all those hits he had at Disney Animation. Even Walt Disney, if you want to take it another step further, the common thing that all of these people have alike is that they all dream bigger than what is happening now.